What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another review. This time we're taking a look at the Oliver Stone biopic known as The Doors. The Doors tells the story of the rise and fall of the American rock band The Doors and its frontman Jim Morrison. So let's waste no time. Let's get right into it. After seeing The Doors for a second time, I can honestly say that I do like this movie by itself, but when comparing it to actual events and to the real people involved, The Doors is a very inaccurate movie and overblows a lot of events that did take place in real life. And I also think that it kind of does a disservice to Jim Morrison as a man, as this movie kind of downplays the man side of Jim Morrison and overblows the mythic Lizard King side of Jim Morrison, which I think was which I think was a big mistake on Oliver Stone's part, because we end up getting a Jim Morrison who is pretty much just this overblown cartoon character that's borderline on a sociopath and just does not come across as somebody you want to have any connection with, which I think is a shame, because the first half of The Doors to me is actually really, really good. The second half, it does have some good things in it, but I think it downplays the human side of Jim Morrison and over accentuates his Lizard King persona. So with all that being said, I'm going to do my best to illustrate both my pros and my cons when it comes to The Doors. So, my pros first. The cast in this movie is outstanding. Val Kilmer as Jim Morrison. This is an Oscar-winning performance by Kilmer. He disappeared into the role of Jim Morrison to the point where you felt like you were watching a reincarnated version of Jim Morrison. Val Kilmer brought his A game to this movie. He had the look, the mannerisms, the poses, and the posture of Jim Morrison. It felt like you were watching Jim Morrison play himself. I cannot praise Val Kilmer enough as the role of Jim Morrison. He was outstanding. The supporting cast that accompanied him, you had Kyle MacLachlan as Ray Manzarek, you had Kevin Dillon as John Densmore, and you had Frank Whaley as Robbie Krieger, who played the other three members of the Doors. I thought they fit their roles really, really well. I liked the on-screen chemistry between McLaughlin and Jim Morrison and Val Kilmer, since Morrison and Manzarek pretty much co-created the Doors. I like how the movie establishes their friendship and overall establishes their friendship in the first half of this movie. So I thought that was really well handled as well. I also like Meg Ryan in the role of Pam Carson, who is the doomed girlfriend of Jim Morrison. I thought I thought that Kilmer and Ryan had really good on-screen chemistry with one another, and I felt the budding romance that developed between the two. I thought that stuff was well handled, like really well handled. I like the recreation of the Doors concerts. I thought they were really well done, and Stone did a real good job at creating this very mystical, ethereal type of presence to these shows. Like, he really went out of his way to make to make to recreating these concerts in a very mystifying way, I should say. It looks very psychedelic, so I got no complaints with that when it comes to a visual presentation. This is a good-looking movie. Cinematographer by Robert Richardson looks cinematography by Robert Richardson is well done. Oliver Stone's directing, like, I cannot criticize Stone as a director, because when he's behind the camera, the man is ultra talented. He has his own distinct style, and The Doors is no different. Stone always has that psychedelic, just acid trip type of style, and it fits the tone of The Doors perfectly, since The Doors was a band that sang about acid trips and just these, ethereal, mystical things. So it fit the tone and overall like presentation of this movie as a whole. So I can appreciate that from a visual standpoint. Uh, yeah, from an overall production value, this is a great looking movie. From an overall casting presentation, this movie's fantastic. In addition to the actors that I mentioned, you also have actors like Michael Wincott, Michael Madsen, Crispin Glover, who also make appearances in this movie, who I thought were really good in their roles for the most part. I think their roles are kind of downplayed way too much, and mainly because the characters they play, they had more of a role in the history of the Doors than Oliver Stone presented, and this is where my criticisms are going to come in. So I like the first half of this movie because pretty much we got to see Jim Morrison before the Doors. Like, we got to see the poetic side of Jim Morrison. his almost sensitive side of Jim Morrison, the human side, if you will. But once the movie kicks into high gear and the doors really start to take off as and the doors really start to take off into the mainstream, that's where Oliver Stone kind of overemphasizes the Lizard King persona of Jim Morrison, the recklessness of Jim Morrison, the overblown, just borderline sociopathic tendencies of Jim Morrison, to the point where every scene that Val Kilmer's in as Jim Morrison, he's having a bottle, he's in an acid trip, or he's doing some random act of violence like having a knife fight during Thanksgiving dinner, or locking Pam into a burning closet, or throwing TVs at his bandmates, or just doing some just horrible, horrible things that makes you just wonder, how could anyone get along with this man? How did this man last for as long as he did with the personality that's being presented to me? And I agree with real members of the Doors when they say, hey, listen, Oliver Stone overblew a lot of the things in this movie. That, number one, they did not happen the way that you see it, or number two, they flat out just didn't happen at all. And that's one of my biggest criticisms. Like, I understand you want to take artistic licenses to create a dramatic piece. That's what a movie's supposed to do. I get that, but I think Jim Morrison's life is fascinating enough where you can recreate the real events that took place and not have to overblow everything to the point where it looks just downright ridiculous, and you make Jim Morrison into a very unlikable guy. And that's my biggest complaint with this movie, is that the first half, it makes Morrison likable, but the second half, it makes you just not want to see this man, battle. Does not make you want to see this man go on his road to redemption. It kind of like, why can't Jim Morrison just go away? He's a toxic person. And of course, Morrison meets his demise after he dies of a heart attack at 27 in a bathtub, and then 3 years later, his girlfriend Pam dies at the age of 27, which is very eerie. They both died at 27. That's just ridiculously eerie. But yeah, like, the movie does show those things, and yeah, the movie does overblow a lot of the events, which I don't think that was really necessary. I think Stone should have had a more perfect balance by showing the sensitive side of Jim and the overblown, preposterous side of Jim. I think he should have found that balance. Even in the second half of this movie, where we should have seen more flashes of who Jim is when he's clean and sober. The sensitive poet and the funny guy that everyone loves to be around with, to contrast with the alcoholic, just overblown personality that he would have when he's tripping balls and drinking like a fish and having an affair with every woman he can get his hands on. That's my biggest complaint, is that it overblows the myth of Jim Morrison to the point of being a borderline Looney Tunes cartoon. I'm not a big fan of that, and I actually think that does a disservice to the Jim Morrison character. Another thing that I didn't care for is that the second half of the movie kind of downplays a lot of members of the Doors. Like, the first half of the movie, I thought the other three members, they had some good screen time, but in the second movie, it pretty much becomes the Jim Morrison show, and to me at least, we barely get to see Jim Morrison interact with his bandmates. He's either interacting with this woman named Patricia, who's like a rock journalist who he's having an affair with, or he's having fights with Pam, or he's just on the stage acting like a complete buffoon. It's like, I didn't really care for that sort of thing. I mean, it's well performed and it's well done from a directorial standpoint, but when you comparing it, as somebody who thinks that Stone should have done a better job at really deep diving into Morrison's conflict with his alcoholism and drug abuse, to the point that it eventually took his life. I would like to have seen more of that internal struggle, and how Morrison just couldn't control those demons that eventually took his life. I think that would have also made for a really good story. Like, the sensitive poet is trapped by his own reckless nature, and he can't find a way to break free. It feels like Morrison just gave in to his temptations, and he never came back from it, and we never saw hints of him coming back for it. I think that was a real shame. So yeah, I think, like I said, overall, I do like The Doors as a movie. It does have a lot of really good, solid elements to it, but when you do compare it to real life, some events are really overblown, and we never really get to see the internal struggle that Jim Morrison has with his fame and with his drug abuse and everything like that. We just see him act like a crazy guy for most of the second half of the movie. But overall, I do recommend this movie. I do think it's actually really, really good, and that's why, to me, it's a 6.5 out of 10. It's a good movie, but it's a movie that when you watch it, yeah, things could have been handled and done so much better than how they were. So yeah, those are my thoughts on The Doors. Let me know yours in the comment sections down below. Like the video and subscribe, and I'll check you back next time for more.